Wake up. We're losing this country in real time. This is not bloviation. This is not exaggeration. It's happening. You don't get a do-over. 249 years, those enduring values, best of Roman Republic, Greek democracy, co-equal branches of government, popular sovereignty. The rule of law is being replaced with the rule of done, period, full stop. And so we have to assert ourselves with more clarity and conviction.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in the East. More clarity and conviction and a plea to all Americans to wake up. Urgent words from Democrats, from the man currently taking on Donald Trump with seemingly everything he's got, California's Governor Gavin Newsom. With every pushback, every speech, every interview, every tweet, every maneuver, even trolling that Gavin Newsom does to get at Trump, he seems to be getting under Trump's skin and getting at the heart of what this fight is about and where it is being waged. It is a fight so much more about the foundations of our country than just debates about different policies. It is about democracy, whether it endures. It is about right and wrong and whether we are on the right side of any of this. It's about the rule of law, whether we still have one, which the governor aptly put as being replaced by the rule of dawn. That rule of dawn is making its mark on our government already in the 7 months since Donald Trump took office, especially this summer, where we have seen power grabs, actual, not figurative, actual power grabs by the Trump administration at every level and everywhere we look. Let's just tick through what's happened in the last couple weeks. National Guard troops are now actively deployed in our nation's capital, ones that, as of this week, are now armed. Multiple officials have been fired for not giving Donald Trump exactly the data or the answers or the responses he wants, the latest of whom being the CDC director, who wasn't in line with the HHS secretary enough. Donald Trump rolled out an actual red carpet and built a blue platform to stand on together next to a world leader well known to be a vicious dictator and wanted for war crimes by the ICC. Trump has floated stopping states from voting by mail and from using voting machines. And that's just a few. It would take the whole hour to go through all of them. In response to these blatantly anti-democratic steps, we have started to see a rise in opposition on the grassroots side, with numerous town hall meetings that we've shown you some of, erupting into angry shouting matches as voters voice their discontent with their elected representatives. A structural opposition is also starting to emerge. Multiple governors are standing up and leading a charge against Donald Trump's autocratic policies and rhetoric. J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, Wes Moore of Maryland, and of course, Gavin Newsom of California. Take a listen.
Donald Trump wants to use the military to occupy a U.S. city, punish his dissidents, and score political points. If this were happening in any other country, we would have no trouble calling it what it is, a dangerous power grab.
I'm standing my guard, and we are locked in to make sure that our people will continue to grow and thrive and succeed in this moment, despite the fact that we're watching a federal government who seems to make my communities and our neighborhoods some kind of punchline.
He tried to light democracy on fire. He dialed for 11, almost 12,000 votes. Now he's doing it in plain sight. And people say, oh, it's just Trump being Trump. People actually think this guy's serious about having another election? You think he's joking about 2028? Wake up.
Let me ask you about a couple.
Excuse me, and I know it's impolite. We have to be more calm and demure.
A couple of your own.
But I'm not calm, and I'm not going to submit myself to niceties. Not when this guy is trying to wreck our goddamn country.
As polls overall keep showing brutal, alarmingly low approval ratings for Donald Trump's agenda. A new Quinnipiac poll shows just 37% of all Americans approve of the job Donald Trump is doing. It echoes other recent surveys like the Gallup poll. All throughout the hour, we'll take a look at this growing resistance from Democrats at the local level and the national level and the state level, everything in between. It's where we start the hour. Some of our favorite experts and friends with us for the hour. MSNBC senior contributing editor Michele Norris is back. And lucky for us, MSNBC political and national affairs analyst John Heilman and Basil Smikle are back with us as well. Michele, I watched this interview by Governor Newsom and coined it the "Wake the F Up" speech. I do love what seemed to be the worldview from Democrats at one time, which was when they go low, we go high. I think that, you know, that only worked for Michelle Obama. Nobody else should have followed that advice. And I do like where Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker seem to be trying to take the party. Your thoughts?
Well, even Michelle Obama changed her thoughts on that. If you remember at the Democratic National Convention, you know, her tone changed. You have to meet the moment. It seems like these are governors who are engaged in a fight where they now understand the rules of engagement. And you're seeing more courage, but you're also seeing them understanding now how to punch back, where his weak spots are, how they can rally the forces. And also, you know, some of this is punching back at Donald Trump, but a lot of this is also just understanding the storm that's coming in their direction because of the cuts in Medicaid, because of the cuts in FEMA, because of what we just saw this week at the CDC. And I think that other Democrats will likely look at this and find a little bit of spine in their step also. You didn't use the clip of Tim Walz this week also, you know, taking it to Donald Trump and talking about his ankles and, you know, hoping that he can find a comfortable seat because of them. And so I think that some of this is rhetoric, and it's not just rhetoric. The rhetoric is important because it is rallying the base, but it is also governors leading their party and governors understanding that they are now lieutenants in a war.
I mean, I want to read you Ezra Klein's comments on what you just said. This is in the New York Times today. Quote, this is Ezra Klein of the New York Times. I don't like any of this. I certainly didn't vote for it. But Trump promised and Americans voted for the biggest deportation operation in U.S. history. It was always going to be ugly and cruel. So I can see that picture. And then it flickers. My eyes refocus, and I see the evisceration of due process. I see detention centers being built where it is extraordinarily hard for lawyers and families to reach the people inside. I see men in masks refusing to identify themselves and pulling people into vans. I see armed U.S. troops in camo, some on horseback, riding through MacArthur Park in Los Angeles like they're an occupying army. I see Trump sending in armed forces to take over the American Capitol. In an instance, this could all explode. You could have American troops firing on American civilians in an American city in a country-defining crisis. What happens then? Michele, I think a lot of people are starting to say the quiet, anxious stuff out loud, which is that what Trump is setting up is what John Kelly warned about ahead of the election, an incredibly combustible situation.
John Kelly warned about it. Kamala Harris warned about it. We were warned. And people still voted for Donald Trump. I'm going to quote something else that Ezra Klein said. That Donald Trump acts like a king because he can't govern like a president. And, you know, he had an ambitious agenda. He's not interested in governing, and that's why he does so much by fiat. If you wanted to come into office with this kind of ambitious agenda, you normally would have to convince even people in your party. You'd have to convince the American public. You'd have to legislate these changes. He's not interested in doing that, and that's why we see this heavy hand. That's why we see the cruelty, and his character is on display in these acts. He is a man that we're looking at a president who has a cruel heart. And he has introduced a level of cruelty into our, not just our American politics, but our American life. And when Gavin Newsom says we are losing the country, I don't want to be dark here, but he's talking in the pluperfect about something that is happening, perhaps, or he's talking in the future about something that's happening, you know, down the road. I think we're actually seeing the foundation crumble beneath us. And that's why this kind of action that we're seeing from the governors is just so necessary to push back against this and resist, because one of the things we know about autocracies is even a small amount of resistance can make a difference.
Donald Trump and his allies have been saying for some time that they hope to end the Epstein matter or release something and make it quiet down, and certainly by Labor Day. Well, it's not going according to their plan. Congress is returning to Capitol Hill. You got a bipartisan duo that wants to force a House vote requiring Trump's DOJ to release all the Epstein documents once and for all. Since for all the double talk, Trump's administration is clearly not doing that. The same duo says they will hold a press conference with Epstein survivors on the first day Congress returns from recess. Now, I could tell you here in the newsroom, we hear about a lot of press conferences, and sometimes you look and say, this is important, maybe we'll cover it. Other times you look and you say, maybe it's a political gimmick. It always depends on the news of the day. You watch the news, so you probably know that. But it would be a good bet that a lot of people online and in the news media will be wanting to cover some version of that news conference, considering that Trump has open questions, he has not fulfilled his vows for transparency, and substantively, it matters when victims, some of whom have never appeared in this formulation together, speak out about what they say is the Trump administration's failures. So that is pressure. House Democrats also looked over this first batch of documents that were kind of pushed out here in the summer period from DOJ and say most of them are not new. They were basically already public. The DOJ did release something new, its unusual interview with the Epstein co-conspirator Maxwell, but that's raised a lot of questions amidst these blanket denials.
I never, ever saw any man doing something inappropriate with a woman of any age. And I did introduce him to women. I did, but not underage women. So I never saw an aggressive move. I never saw anything that was
non-consensual.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay. I never saw anything that was non-consensual.
That's the voice of a sex trafficking convict disclaiming things she was already convicted of. It undercuts her credibility and speaks to the farce of that interview, according to many legal experts. We have one on hand, as you see, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney, MSNBC legal analyst. Welcome back. Joyce, the trickle or drip of some information or sometimes recycled information from DOJ seems to be raising more questions. They want to claim they're releasing stuff, but the big stuff they haven't released yet, and what they have released looks fairly stale. What does that tell you about sort of where they're at with a president who once claimed there would be transparency in this case?
Well, and that's exactly the issue here, Ari. DOJ was under no obligation to release its case files. But Donald Trump, the president, the head of the executive branch, their boss, said that there would be transparency. And so the fact that they've backtracked, I think, raises a lot of legitimate suspicions and concerns about what might be in that evidentiary file if it were released. So far, we've seen two dodges. We've seen this ridiculous end run, this attempt to get the courts to release grand jury material, which failed. And in the process of that, we learned that the only thing that was involved there was two summary witnesses testifying. So nothing new there. And then we have this release, this dump of information vouched for by Representative Comer, which turns out to be nothing new. And so at some point, you don't have to be a former federal prosecutor to have your little ears pick up and wonder what it is that they're trying to keep from the American people.
Mm-hmm. And jailhouse statements, be they issued in this unusual interview format, or what sometimes happens, as you know, in cases where there's things that are captured that an inmate says to another inmate or in a context, they don't have automatically high credibility. We're talking about convicts. Sometimes we're talking about people who are trying to barter or trade information or continue to clear their own name for whatever their own personal reasons. And so when Maxwell went on and on about how nothing bad ever happened, I played one part, I'm about to play you another. I'm wondering what it tells you about her credibility, because the administration wanted to release this to say, look, here's a character witness for Donald Trump, in a sense. And that's so bizarre because a convicted sex trafficker is a terrible character witness. Here she was. Take a listen.
I saw him with lots of masseuses. I never saw a single masseuse ever look unhappy or not come back or whatever. So based on my observation, I don't think that if you are being raped, as now he's like this prolific, I just can't imagine why you would return.
It's not what you observed at the time.
Not what I observed at the time, no.
So Blanche sort of gives her this open door, and she talks about how whatever the ring of activities, including these so-called masseuses, were happening, Epstein never did anything in her observation that caused anyone to be concerned. I'll let you have the easy job of analyzing and fact-checking this. I'll just say it sounds ludicrous because we know these people were concerned because we have their testimony. Some of them are going to be speaking out next week. We know they were concerned after their interactions with the now deceased defendant Epstein.
It's really hard to imagine a less credible witness. The only thing that matters here isn't my assessment of Maxwell or your assessment. It's the jury's assessment. They heard all of the evidence. They heard her defense. They found her guilty. A unanimous jury of her peers convicted her. Look, she's sitting in federal prison. We all understand the game. Her case is still on appeal. She has hope, perhaps, that her conviction will be turned and she might be able to get her life back. It seems very unlikely to me, having studied the briefs, that she has anything there. But we understand what the game is. And I think your point here is so important. These victims who are willing to come forward, it's not easy. And it's especially difficult in the current context where someone like Donald Trump sits in the White House. And we now live in a world that treats women very differently than the world treated women even several years ago. So these victims are engaging in an act of bravery, trying to make sure that the truth is what shines through all of this. The fact that the Justice Department released this tape is really, as you say, just a ludicrous exercise. You hear Todd Blanche literally putting words in the witness's mouth. You hear him offering her up as a credible source. We all know that she isn't.
Yes, I think what happened today was that we were met with some of the members of our leadership that are overseeing a lot of the information technology, those kinds of things. They basically met us. They escorted us out. We were able to drive away. It was not a tremendous, significant problem, but it's really the accumulation of a lot that has been happening over the last several weeks. Where we were getting requests for data. We were trying to get that data available for the administration to look at, but we just have no idea exactly what they are planning to do with it. We need to get politics out of public health. And I think the secretary right now could do a lot to open up, have more transparency, and help us understand what it is that they're trying to do with the data and what they're trying to revise with a lot of the vaccine recommendations.
Dr. Jernigan, last December, I had a conversation with a fellow CDC official. And the conversation I remember very clearly, because the question that I had during that transition ahead of Inauguration Day was, if this administration tried to politicize the CDC, what would then happen? And this official told me very clearly that there was a scientific integrity clearance process, effectively. You had scientists, you had statisticians in there to ensure that anything that ultimately got to the American public was true peer-reviewed science. After your departure and that of your other CDC colleagues, what should the American public expect about the scientific integrity that was released to them in these coming weeks?
Well, I can't speak to exactly what is going to come out. I have not seen it. I do know that we have talked with the administration. We have gotten indications that what is being done is legal. But I cannot see that the scientific practice that they're using is one that is best standard, gold standard science. And I can't tell whether or not the ethical responsibility of the personally identifiable information, things like that are in the data, I can't speak to that. And so the American public we need to see what that data shows, and then we need to make some assessments of whether or not we can trust that information.
Dr. Patel, America has a health care crisis. And at the center of that crisis is Donald Trump and RFK Jr. I'd like you to listen to Trump and RFK during the 2024 cycle talking about making America healthy again. Let's take a listen.
I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines.
I'm not going to take away anybody's vaccines. I've never been anti-vaccine.
You will not take any vaccine that is currently on the market.
If vaccines are working for somebody, I'm not going to take them away.
Well, that was a load of crap, because just this week, his health department said that, oh, guess what? Those of you who get COVID, too bad, because if you're not 65 or if you're not a baby, you don't get it anymore.
Right.
So the reality of it is we're at the center of what will be an emerging as we go into the winter and we go into flu season and people start getting sick. There's going to be a whole lot of pressure on this administration when it comes to health. Talk us through a little bit of that. And what's your sense of what you're seeing happening at CDC from your experience working on the policy side with the Obama administration, certainly even going back to the Bush administration? You've got both the government and the practical, everyday medical, understanding of how this all comes together.
Yeah, so the practical, Michael, is very clear. People are confused, including health practitioners. So just today, I had a patient who went to CVS to try to get just whatever vaccine was available. And they said, well, you need a prescription. And she said, why do I need a prescription? And there was actually just erroneous guidance given because they were reacting to, unfortunately, like the words that you just heard, the recent words we heard from the secretary. So what people don't realize is that's not guidance. The CDC actually hasn't changed their guidance, and that's part of the reason that they asked Dr. Menarez to resign, was that she had basically said, I'm not rubber stamping something without going through the process that Dan described. The science. Right, exactly. So you've got public that are confused, you've got health professionals who are confused, and not to mention access, because insurance companies hopefully will not follow whatever RFK Jr. is saying. They really do need to follow what comes ultimately out of the CDC, but now we know that as you mentioned, with an interim director who may or may not be the person that will just react politically, that puts the science of vaccines in peril. And what America does, the world follows. It's not an accident that the WHO and many of the global health community follow what the CDC recommends.
Mm-hmm. I am just very struck by these stories that are coming out. And then what I heard from Dr. Jernigan, to say that they were asking for all this data and the scientists were skeptical and concerned about what they were asking for, they as in the administration, and what it would be used for. I mean, is it hyperbole to say that we're in trouble?
Yeah, I think right now we are in a situation where we don't actually understand what it is that they're trying to do with that data. We don't know the processes that they're going to be using to do the analyses. And so with that, it does call into question what findings may be presented in the next few weeks that may undermine a lot of the scientific studies that have been done in the past.
I will just say, y'all, I remember when I worked at the White House, obviously during COVID 2021, and it was not the policy people who were making the decisions about what is it that we're saying to the American people. The CDC director was in the room. Dr. Fauci was in the room. NIH, we had doctors, and there was oftentimes disputes amongst the scientists and the doctor folk and the political people about what we wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we led with the science, and the times that we did not, like when they suggested that everybody get mailed a COVID test and the political people in the room said it was too expensive, people were literally standing in lines all across this country clamoring for COVID tests. And only after that did we mail these COVID tests. So I say that to say I am disturbed by what I am hearing.
And this is a real issue moving forward. Another pandemic could come. I mean, we're talking about children immunizations. The beginning of this school year is starting right now across the country. And one of the parts off of what you're saying, Simone, was I almost kind of regret my question in a way to Secretary Kennedy during the transition before he took on this role, because the reason I was asking, can you promise you're not going to remove any vaccines from the market? It's because his nonprofit tried to petition the FDA to remove the COVID vaccine from being available to the public. But clearly what is being suggested over the CDC right now is potential changes to the immunization schedule. Right. Can you be very specific for the public? You know, okay, they may not remove a vaccine or make it not available to the public, right, but what is the impact of changing the immunization schedule?
It's a huge impact, and it started in June when the secretary replaced the entire entire Advisory Commission on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, which is the advisory body that makes these recommendations based on data, which is, to Dan's point, who knows what kind of data they're going to get. We have to see. Then they make a recommendation to the CDC director. Historically, the CDC director follows those recommendations, but we know that that commission has been replaced with people who have been vocal and current vaccine skeptics, and that changes an immunization schedule that has implications for what we do in the clinic and setting and what it can get covered with insurance. And it has implications, as you pointed out, not just during the height of a respiratory season, but this is ongoing immunity that we have to protect us over our lives. It's not just when we're babies. Tetanus shot every 10 years, flu shots, pneumonia shot when you're 65, RSV. These are all kind of part of the immunization schedule. We as an American public have taken it for granted, Vaughn, because it's always worked. We've never had to, as Simone said, doubt the science. And now it's not working. And I can't believe I'm going to say this. I don't go to the CDC.gov website to get my recommendations. I'm going to AAP.org. I'm going to AAFP.org. I'm going to the medical societies who have taken a courageous and risky stance to say, this is what the science shows us, and we disagree with where HHS has landed.
Dan, Dr. Deborah Ari was the CDC's chief medical officer before she resigned. She had this to say today on MSNBC Reports. Let's take a quick listen to her words of warning.
CDC is in trouble. Public health is in trouble. We need people to pay attention. I am very concerned other leaders are going to leave, and we already don't have enough staffing with a lot of the reductions in force and terminations that recently happened. So we're not going to be prepared for another outbreak should it happen. We can't prevent chronic diseases in communities because we don't have the resources anymore.
After I gave you the wrong thing.
Doctor, the warning can't be any more clear. I mean, you know, what you hear Dr. Patel saying just now about where she's going, where, you know, what the medical community, how it's responding. Citizens are now at the mercy of a rogue, highly incompetent group of individuals who don't, at the end of the day, in my estimation, have the health care of the American people in mind. To Vaughn's point, you've got young kids who are going to be going to school this fall, it already started, and we've already seen pockets of measles exploding around the country. You think that's not going to get worse? Of course it is. And yet, we don't have the vaccines to protect the kids. What the hell are we doing as a country now when we have dumbed down medical care to the point where the idiocracy is telling smart scientists they don't know what they're doing?
Yeah, I can't speak to all of that, but I can say that, you know,
speak to enough of it. We're good.
It is a global, preeminent public health agency, and I have been here for 30 years. I've worked with multiple different administrations. I was willing to work with this administration, but I find that the transparency is not there, and the possibility that the information that comes out from the secretary over the next several weeks will be something that I will not be able to support. And that the American public will have to call into question. And so that's a place I've never been before. I don't like being in that place, but I do want everyone to know that, American people to know that CDC should be the place where you get your information, where you find out how to protect yourself, to get the recommendations. And if we're not able to do that, we'll have to find some other way.
California Governor Gavin Newsom says if President Trump has his way, there may not be an election in 2028. Newsom delivered that stark outlook at Politico's The California Agenda Sacramento Summit on Wednesday, where he warned that the country could soon slide into authoritarianism. Take a look.
I have 24 Trump 2028 hats. His folks keep sending me.
And you think he's going to run again?
Who spends $200 million on a ballroom at their home and then leaves the house? So this is serious, guys. This is serious.
So it'll be Newsom Trump in 28.
No, this guy doesn't believe in free, fair elections. He tried to wreck this country. Were you there, January 6th? He tried to light democracy on fire. He dialed for 11, almost 12,000 votes. Now he's doing it in plain sight.
Joining us now, senior writer for The Dispatch, David Drucker, and Peter Baker and Rick Wilson have been very patient. Thank you guys for staying with us. David, how seriously should we be taking this warning? Is this a possibility?
Well, I mean, anything's a possibility with Trump, but I don't take this seriously. The president's constitutionally barred from running for a third term. States run elections. Contrary to what he says, states are not agents of the federal government. And so he can't force any state to put him on the ballot in 2028. But the president loves to live rent-free in every Democrat's head if it's possible. And I think that, if you're Gavin Newsom, you're not necessarily doing that. But what you are doing is ginning up support from the Democratic base as you look ahead to the next election and beyond. And it's a good way to garner attention. Now, this is not in any way to downplay Trump, his power grabs, his stretching the bounds of executive authority, and what he would do if he could, if he found out that actually the 22nd Amendment doesn't apply to you. I mean, he would run in perpetuity. But I think we need to be careful about how we talk about this and understand what's possible and what is hyperbole that the president is happy to push to keep voters away from other issues that are more prone to hurt him politically, like the economy, like inflation, like his trade agenda.
So, Rick, to David's point, the president has made comments about wanting to hang on to power in the past and stay there beyond his term. He's also shown world leaders, as you heard there, the Trump 2028 hats in the White House gift shop. But is this serious, or is this trolling the Democrats, as David kind of alluded to? Are they taking the bait here? Are Democrats just falling down the rabbit hole that Trump set out for them?
No, I think both things can be true. He can be trolling, and let's remember, Trump is a gambler. Trump is a guy who has pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And by the way, if it had gone just slightly differently on January 6, 2021, and Congress refused to certify the election, Donald Trump would have returned to the White House. He is a guy who will gamble and push and use that shamelessness and that transgression that's so central to his character to try to get away with stuff. And look, if he could get away with it, he would make a shot at it. Again, I think David is correct. The states still run elections as of today, but. Let's also not forget that there are an awful lot of other Republicans who want to run in 2028. And you can already see J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and others starting to make their earliest maneuvers without triggering Trump's radar, who are also going to be talking to their people in their home states going, let's not go crazy with Donald this last time.
So, Peter, we've asked this question many times across many platforms. Can he actually do that? So many times we've asked, and the president continues to persist. He's fired members of the Fed board. He is suing law firms. He's going after the head of the CDC. So, to David and Rick's point, states certify elections, but is there a scenario where President Trump can hang on past 2028? Or is this just a bridge that can't be crossed?
Well, look, it's hard to envision what that scenario looks like exactly at the moment because, in fact, there are no obvious avenues. The Constitution is very clear about this: 2 terms, period. That's it. You're done. And yet, what we've seen, I think, is many times in the past we have said, or people have said, "Oh well, he's just trolling. He wouldn't actually follow through on X, Y, or Z." And then he has tried to follow through on X, Y, or Z. I remember the first term, people said, "Oh, he'll never try to overturn an election." Well, he did. He did try to overturn an election he had lost clearly, as he was told by his own attorney general, as he was told by his own campaign staff. And so, I do think we ought to be careful about ruling anything out in terms of things he might try if he sees an avenue forward to doing so. Now, again, it's hard to envision a plausible scenario for how it would work, but right now you have troops in the streets of Washington, D.C. You have the President of the United States reinterpreting the 14th Amendment on birthright citizenship in a way that no other, no court has done in more than a century. He has time and time again shown a willingness to push the boundaries beyond the imagination because we're accustomed to what previous presidents did. And previous presidents understood the Constitution, understood the 22nd Amendment, and stepped down voluntarily without complaining after 2 terms. And here you've got a president who, we ought to be careful when he says something. Remember, he talked about terminating the Constitution while he was out of office in order to return to power because he thought that Biden should be removed in the middle of his term. So I guess I would be careful about ruling anything out, but it is hard to see the avenue for which he would do it at this point. And I think that's, it's also in his interest not just to troll the Democrats and his opponents, but also to maintain his status as the power rather than be seen as a lame duck too early in his what would be his last term.
Rick, Newsom also sounded the alarm about American elections, pointing to Trump's recent actions in his own state. Let's listen to that.
As he demobilized our National Guard, he kept hundreds of them through Election Day. And he'll do so working in concert, as he has with ICE and Border Patrol, to do the same. You have the largest private police force in the world. When they're done with this, all that funding and that big, beautiful portrayal allows more resources for this private police force that increasingly is showing a tendency not to swear an oath to the Constitution, but to the President of the United States. And he'll be sending them to voting booths and polling places all across this country.
Rick, do you think that's going to happen? Are we going to see Trump ramp up these deployments of the National Guard, ICE, DHS, the military during elections?
Look, I can't speak to that yet, but Trump enjoys the outrage it generates when he mobilizes federal forces onto the streets who are armed in environments where they're not trained to be for law enforcement purposes or immigration purposes. He enjoys that reaction. He is also, from the dictator's playbook, he wants to desensitize people to the presence of those folks out there all the time. He wants, ICE now has a bigger budget than the Marine Corps. And he loves this gigantic force that is answerable only to him. And he is certainly putting it to maximum effect. I would not be shocked if he did try to apply it as an intimidation tactic during the 2026 election season.
Authorities in Washington state have been fighting the state's largest wildfire nonstop for almost 2 months. It's called the Bear Gulch Fire. It's burned 9,000 acres since early July. Officials say it's only 13% contained. It is so big, they've had to rely on contract firefighters. But a group of those firefighters who were battling the blaze had to take a 3-hour timeout from their work on Wednesday. You see, their camp was raided by Border Patrol officials, and they were lined up and told to show their IDs.
Nice. We got hit, guys. That's all right. Tribal member. Yeah, we got pulled over by ICE. Crazy, dude. We got members from the tribe of Umatilla, Cayuse, and Walla Walla. This is crazy, man. Look at that. Post it up. We have a different crew over here. Talk to the boss. And I guess La Migra.
You heard people on the scene claim that at least some of those firefighters were Native Americans, indigenous volunteers. They got raided. State officials confirm it. Now, those Border Patrol officers ultimately arrested 2 of the firefighters. It's not clear why. According to reporting by the Seattle Times, one of the firefighters said members of the crew were told not to take video of the incident. You risked your life out here to save the community, the firefighter said. This is how they treat us. Another firefighter said they were denied the chance to say goodbye to the detained crew members. I asked him if his family can say goodbye to him because they're family and they're just ripping them away, the firefighter told the Times. And this is what he said: "You need to get the blank out of here. I'm going to make you leave." As the Times notes, it's unusual for federal border agents to make arrests during the fighting of an active fire, the largest in the state of Washington, especially in a remote area. In fact, a Biden-era policy bans most immigration enforcement at natural disaster sites, but here we are. Trump and his supporters, Vance says this all the time, they constantly push this line that you either care about Americans or you care about immigrants, not both. But it's racist garbage. We're an interconnected society of human beings who depend on each other to survive and thrive. And there's not some neat line you can cleave between Americans and foreigners. We just have neighbors and communities. Trump world says that's bunk, that there's just two sides. Trump world says that to make America great again, you need armed federal officers roaming streets and businesses and Home Depot parking lots in search of people to disappear, and now raids on camps of firefighters as they literally battle the largest wildfire in the American Northwest. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Stephen Miller and their ilk are going to burn the country to the ground if that's what it takes so they can rule over the ashes.